There is a place where the fog rolls in so thick you can barely see your own hand in front of your face. A place surrounded by freezing currents and water cold enough to kill. A place where America locked away its most dangerous criminals and threw away the key. Alcatraz, the Rock, a 22-acre island sitting in the middle of San Francisco Bay, close enough to see the glittering lights of the city, but far enough that no one could reach them. For nearly 30 years, this island served as the most feared federal prison in the United States. 36 escape attempts, 78 inmates who tried, 14 documented homicides, and 5 men who vanished into the bay, never to be found. In this video, you'll understand exactly how Alcatraz became the most notorious prison in American history, why it was shut down, and what secrets it still holds today. The story of Alcatraz begins long before the first federal prisoner ever set foot on the island. In 1775, a Spanish explorer named Juan Manuel de Ayala sailed into San Francisco Bay and mapped the island for the first time. He named it La Isla de los Alcatrazes, the Island of the Pelicans. For decades, it sat untouched, a barren rock surrounded by some of the most treacherous waters on the Pacific coast. The currents around Alcatraz move fast. The water temperature hovers around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, cold enough to cause hypothermia in minutes. In 1850, the United States government recognized something about this island that would define its future. Its isolation made it a natural fortress. The military moved in, building a fort and eventually converting the island into a military prison. Soldiers who broke the rules, deserters, and prisoners of war spent their sentences surrounded by water and wind. Artifacts from that military era still exist on the island today, buried beneath the more famous federal prison structures. But Alcatraz's true notoriety didn't begin until 1934. That year, the Federal Bureau of Prisons converted the island into a maximum security federal penitentiary. This was no ordinary prison. The government designed Alcatraz to hold the prisoners that no other facility could manage. The men who were too violent, too clever, or too well-connected for the regular prison system. The concept was simple. If you caused problems at Leavenworth, if you tried to corrupt the guards at Atlanta, if you were a threat anywhere else, you got sent to the Rock. Construction on the main prison building finished in 1937. The facility could hold 336 inmates, though it typically operated below capacity. This was intentional. Alcatraz maintained a ratio of roughly 1 guard for every 3 prisoners, which was far higher than any other federal institution at the time. Every inmate got their own cell. Every cell had its own sink and toilet. There were no dormitories, no shared spaces where gangs could organize. The prison was built to isolate men not just from the outside world, but from each other. The inmates who arrived at Alcatraz read like a roster of America's Most Wanted. Al Capone, the Chicago mob boss who had run a criminal empire worth millions, landed on the island and was stripped of every privilege he had ever bought. At other prisons, Capone had bribed guards, arranged for special meals, and lived more like a guest than a prisoner. On Alcatraz, he was inmate number 85. Nothing more. Capone once said, "I am not interested in what your last name is, only what your friend's last name is." But on the Rock, friendships meant little. The guards didn't care who you were on the outside. George Machine Gun Kelly arrived at Alcatraz with a reputation for kidnapping and armed robbery. The man who had once terrorized the Midwest found himself locked in a cell measuring 5 feet by 9 feet, staring at the same concrete walls day after day. Robert Stroud, who became known as the Birdman of Alcatraz, spent years on the island from 1942 until the prison closed. The nickname was misleading. While Stroud had kept birds at a previous prison, where he studied avian diseases and even published research, he was not allowed to keep birds at Alcatraz. He spent much of his time in solitary confinement, alone with nothing but his thoughts and the sound of the bay. Life inside Alcatraz followed a rigid structure. Inmates were counted 13 times a day. Meals were served at exact times. Talking was restricted during certain hours. Every privilege, from access to the library to time in the recreation yard, had to be earned through good behavior. The guards controlled everything, and the island itself served as the final guard. Even if a man made it past the locked doors and the armed towers, the freezing bay waited. Most people believe that no one ever escaped Alcatraz. The official record from the National Park Service tells a more complicated story. Over the prison's 29 years of operation, there were 36 escape attempts involving 78 inmates. Of those, 23 were caught and brought back. 6 were shot and killed during their attempts, and 5 are listed as missing and presumed drowned. Presumed, not confirmed. The most famous escape happened in June of 1962. Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin spent months planning their breakout. They used sharpened spoons and a homemade electric drill fashioned from a stolen vacuum cleaner motor to widen the ventilation ducts in their cells. They crafted dummy heads out of soap, toilet paper, and real human hair collected from the prison barbershop. They placed those heads on their pillows to fool the guards during nighttime counts. Then they climbed through the vents, made their way to the roof, and descended to the shore. They inflated a raft made from over 50 stolen raincoats that they had glued together with contact cement, and they paddled into the darkness. The 3 men were never found. The FBI investigated the case for 17 years and officially concluded that the men most likely drowned in the cold waters of the bay, but no bodies were ever recovered. In 2013, a letter surfaced that was allegedly written by John Anglin, claiming he and his brother survived the escape and lived into old age. The FBI investigated the letter but never confirmed its authenticity. Frank Morris himself once said, "The only way your words can have any value is if they come from your experiences." Whatever Morris experienced after that night in 1962, he never shared it with anyone. The 1962 escape gets most of the attention, but Alcatraz had faced violence long before that night. In 1946, a group of inmates launched what became known as the Battle of Alcatraz. Prisoners managed to overpower guards and seize weapons, hoping to fight their way off the island. The attempt failed. Armed Marines were called in. The battle lasted 2 days. When it ended, inmates and guards alike lay dead or wounded. The violence of the Battle of Alcatraz sent shockwaves through the federal prison system and reinforced the island's reputation as a place of last resort. There has always been a debate about whether Alcatraz represented justice or cruelty. Supporters of the prison argued that the strict environment was the only way to manage the most dangerous criminals in the country. These were men who had killed, kidnapped, and organized crime on a national scale. They had corrupted guards and broken out of other prisons. Alcatraz was designed specifically to contain them. Critics saw something different. They pointed to the psychological toll of extreme isolation. Inmates who spent months or even years in solitary confinement often suffered severe mental breakdowns. The constant fog, the cold, the sound of the city just a mile and a quarter away but completely unreachable. All of this took a toll that went beyond physical punishment. Some former inmates described hearing the sounds of New Year's Eve celebrations drifting across the water from San Francisco, the laughter and music of free people living their lives just beyond reach. That kind of psychological pressure broke men in ways that concrete walls and iron bars never could. By the early 1960s, Alcatraz was falling apart. The saltwater air had been eating away at the concrete and steel for decades. Pipes corroded. The electrical system deteriorated. The buildings needed constant repair. Running a prison on an island meant that everything, food, water, supplies, building materials, had to be transported by boat. The annual operating cost hit approximately $350,000, which in 2024 dollars equals roughly $3 million when adjusted for inflation, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. That made Alcatraz the most expensive prison per inmate in the entire federal system. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy ordered the prison closed, and on March 21, 1963, the last inmates were transferred off the island. The rock went silent. For years after its closure, Alcatraz sat abandoned. The buildings decayed further. Graffiti covered the walls. Vegetation grew through cracks in the concrete. In 1972, the island was designated a National Historic Landmark and opened to the public as part of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, managed by the National Park Service. What was once the most feared prison in America became a tourist destination. Today, over 1.5 million visitors travel to Alcatraz Island every year, according to National Park Service data from 2023. They board ferries from Fisherman's Wharf and make the short crossing to the island. The audio tour is widely considered one of the best in the national park system. It features first-person accounts recorded by actual former inmates and guards, their voices echoing through the same cell blocks where they once lived and worked. Visitors walk through the main cell house, stand inside the cramped cells, and look out through the barred windows at the San Francisco skyline. Ongoing restoration efforts work to preserve the historical buildings and prevent further decay from the relentless salt air. Alcatraz has become a cultural icon, featured in dozens of movies, books, and television shows. The 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz, starring Clint Eastwood, dramatized the Morris and Anglin escape and cemented the story in popular imagination. But there's a real tension between the Hollywood version of Alcatraz and the actual history. The film's focus on daring escapes and tough guy bravado. The reality was much darker. Men went insane in their cells. Some slashed their own Achilles tendons to avoid being put back in isolation. The 14 documented homicides between 1934 and 1963 tell a story of violence that no movie can fully capture. What makes Alcatraz endure in public memory is the contradiction at its core. It was a place built to be inescapable, and 5 men may have proven that it wasn't. It was designed to break the most hardened criminals, and some of them broke in ways their captors never intended. It was supposed to be forgotten after it closed, and instead it became one of the most visited sites in the United States. The rock sits in San Francisco Bay today exactly as it has for centuries, battered by wind, wrapped in fog, holding its secrets tight. The currents still churn, the water is still cold, and somewhere beneath those dark waves, the answer to whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lived or died remains hidden. Alcatraz never gives up what it takes.